You ever look at your pet and just wish you knew what was going on in their head? Or maybe you've wondered what those birds chirping outside your window are really talking about. Well, that very idea is at the heart of an old legend and also a really fascinating book called King Solomon's Ring by a guy named Conrad Lorenz. So today, let's dive into what it really means to understand the secret language of the animal world.
It all kicks off with this ancient legend about King Solomon. The story goes he had this magical ring that gave him an absolutely incredible power. He could understand the language of every single animal on Earth. I mean, can you imagine that? Knowing all the secrets of every creature out there. But of course, there was a catch. This amazing gift came with a really heavy price. One day, a nightingale told him a devastating secret that his 999th queen was cheating on him. And that knowledge, that truth, it was just too painful to bear. In his grief, Solomon supposedly threw the ring away forever, choosing silence over the awful truth. So that makes you wonder, right? If knowing everything brings that much pain, who in their right mind would actually go looking for that kind of knowledge? Well, that's where our main character comes in. A real-life guy who decided he didn't need a magic ring to talk to animals. Conrad Lorenz. And the contrast between these two is just fascinating. Solomon had his magic ring, right? But Lorenz, he relied on things we can all access. Science, a whole lot of patient observation, and just genuine love for animals. He didn't run away from knowledge, he spent his entire life chasing it. See, Lorenz basically invented this field of study called ethology. His whole thing was that you don't need magic to get what animals are about. You just have to watch them, really watch them, and listen, and start to piece together the signals and instincts that have been built into them over millions of years. And maybe the most famous thing he's known for came from a pretty simple but totally profound observation he made with some newborn goslings. He discovered this idea he called imprinting.
So here's how it went down. A little gosling hatched, and the very first moving thing it laid its eyes on wasn't its mother goose. It was Conrad Lorenz. And boom, in that one critical moment after birth, an unbreakable bond was forged. That little gosling imprinted on him. And as far as it was concerned, this bearded scientist was its mom.
And, this bond, it was a huge responsibility. If Lorenz even tried to walk out of the room, the gosling would start crying out, totally distressed. He had to keep it right by his bed. He even learned to speak its language, making this little gang, gang, gang sound, which was his best guess at a mother goose's "I'm right here" call, just to calm the little guy down so it could sleep. So this whole idea of a deep connection, it's not just for scientists out in a field with some geese, right? We see the most powerful and maybe the most complicated version of this every single day, and that's in our relationship with our dogs. Get this. Over thousands of years of domestication, something wild happened inside a dog's brain. The parts that were all about survival in the wild, finding their own food, defending themselves, those parts actually shrank by an estimated 70%. So what happened? Well, they pretty much traded in their wild independence for a spot next to us. It was this huge evolutionary bargain that made them almost completely dependent on us. But in exchange, it hardwired something absolutely incredible into their DNA, this profound, unshakable capacity for loyalty. And honestly, you can't overstate this. For a dog, their human isn't just a friend or the person who feeds them. That human is their entire world, their whole reason for being. I mean, just think about the famous story of Hachiko, the dog in Japan who waited at the train station every single day for his owner, for 9 years after the man had already passed away. It's just a heartbreaking example of that total devotion. But, and this is the hard part of the story, that total devotion, it's often met with our own failures. We are the center of their universe, and so often we just fail to live up to that incredible responsibility. Think about what that means. When someone abandons a dog, they're not just getting rid of a pet. They are literally shattering its entire universe. When puppies are born in awful puppy mills and taken from their moms way too early, they miss out on that crucial bonding that teaches them how to feel safe and how to trust. We are breaking a sacred contract that their entire evolution has programmed them to honor. So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway here? Lorenz's work really showed us that King Solomon's ring, it's not some lost magical artifact. It's actually something we all have the power to wear. See, the real ring, the real magic, it's empathy. It's having the patience to just watch and learn. It's having the compassion to try to understand. And it's having the integrity to accept the huge responsibility that comes with being the center of another creature's world.
We really don't need a magic ring to hear what animals are telling us. They're talking to us all the time, through their trust, their loyalty, everything they do. So the real question isn't whether we can listen. It's, are we trying hard enough? Are we choosing to put on that invisible ring and really, truly listen?
Have you ever just watched an animal and wondered, what on earth is going on in its head? If we could just understand them, what would they tell us? Well, that's exactly the big idea behind Konrad Lorenz's amazing book, King Solomon's Ring. We're going to dive into some of his most surprising discoveries, ideas that will totally flip what you think you know about the animal world right on its head. So let me just start with this question. Are pigeons more ruthless than wolves? I know, it sounds completely backwards, right? We think of pigeons as, these peaceful city birds and wolves as the ultimate symbol of ferocity. But Lorenz suggested that the truth might actually be the other way around. And that one question, well, it pretty much challenges everything we assume about nature.
So, how in the world did he come up with such a wild idea? Well, it all comes down to his method. See, Lorenz believed that to really get what animals are about, you can't just barge in with all your human biases. Nope. You have to slow way down. You have to be patient. You got to get on their timeline. In other words, the real secret to seeing the truth is to learn how to be, well, lazy.
And that idea of slowing down brings us to the first huge myth we have to bust. And that's the idea that the natural world is just this nonstop whirlwind of activity.
You know the saying, busy as a bee, right? It makes us think of nature as this place of constant hard work. But the reality? It's much, much closer to lazy as a lion. For most animals, life isn't about working all the time. It's about saving every last drop of energy until it is absolutely positively necessary to spend it. And we're not just talking about big cats here. Sure, lions snooze most of the day away, but get this. Some studies suggest that our own hunter-gatherer ancestors might have only worked for about an hour a day to get everything they needed. And even the poster children for hard work, ants and bees, turns out they spend most of their time just chillin'. That flurry of activity we see is just a tiny, tiny part of their day.
And if that doesn't convince you, just look at a giraffe. In a whole 24-hour day, a giraffe spends only about 8% of its time on stuff like eating. That's less than 2 hours a day. The rest of the time is all about resting and conserving energy. The big lesson here is that nature doesn't reward busyness. It rewards efficiency.
Okay, so if nature isn't all that busy, then it must be this peaceful, tranquil place, right? Kind of like a perfect escape from all our human chaos. Well, that brings us to the next myth we need to tackle. Because when you really look close, you find out that just beneath that calm surface, nature can be unbelievably brutal. I think a lot of us see a home aquarium like this. It's like a beautiful, little peaceful piece of the ocean we can have in our living room. It looks like the definition of harmony. But as Lorenz discovered, that serene-looking glass box is actually a stage for some of the most savage dramas you could ever imagine.
And let me introduce you to one of the main actors. Forget lions, forget sharks. According to Lorenz, one of the most savage predators he ever saw was this guy, the water beetle. Yeah, it's small, it doesn't look like much, and it lives in those supposedly peaceful ponds and fish tanks.
But what makes it so savage isn't its power, it's the way it hunts. It doesn't just bite its prey. No, it ambushes it, injects this fluid that literally dissolves its victim's insides while it's still alive, and then it just sucks out the liquid goo, leaving behind a totally empty shell. It is straight up horror movie stuff happening in a drop of water.
And it's not just the beetles. Think about those beautiful Siamese fighting fish. They are so incredibly aggressive and territorial that if two males even see each other, they'll launch an attack with so much force that they can literally crack the glass of the aquarium trying to get at their rival. So much for that serene underwater world, huh? Okay, so this brings us to what might be the most mind-bending idea of all. We've seen that nature isn't always busy, and it's definitely not always peaceful. But what does it really mean for an animal to be ferocious?
Our whole definition of that word is about to get a serious reality check. All right, let's go all the way back to that first question. Who's more ruthless, the pigeon or the wolf? Well, the pigeon, which only has a little beak, has absolutely no built-in instinct to stop fighting. It can and will slowly peck a rival to death over hours. It's brutal. But the wolf? The wolf has jaws that can kill in an instant, and because its weapons are so deadly, it has evolved these incredibly powerful, built-in rules of engagement. When a losing wolf gives up and shows its throat, the winning wolf is biologically forced to stop. It just can't deliver the killing bite. So the really critical takeaway here is that the law of the wild isn't just kill or be killed. For animals with serious weapons, it's actually about a complex social rule, knowing when not to kill. This restraint is absolutely essential for the species to survive. I mean, what's the point of killing off a surrendered member of your own group? It's just a waste. So all these fascinating animal behaviors, they're not just trivia. They actually hold up a mirror to us, offering some really profound and sometimes pretty uncomfortable lessons about our own human world. Everything from how we structure society to how we fight our wars. Let's start with something we can all understand. Take a look at purebred dogs, like an English bulldog. Humans, in our obsession with creating a specific, pure look, have bred them to have almost no genetic diversity. And what's the result? They are riddled with health problems and often can't even give birth on their own. Now, compare that to a mixed breed dog, which is almost always healthier, hardier, and more robust. The lesson is crystal clear, isn't it? Both in the natural world and in human civilization, trying to enforce some kind of purity or monoculture always leads to weakness and fragility. Real strength, real resilience comes from diversity, from mixing different genes, different ideas, and different cultures. Now let's think back to that wolf. Its restraint is directly connected to its physical weapons, its teeth and jaws. But what about us humans? We've invented weapons from drones to long-range missiles that completely separate us from the act of violence. And that technology dangerously strips away the psychological and physical barriers that create restraint. It's just a lot easier to press a button and see a blip disappear from a screen than it is to face an opponent up close. You know, when you think about it, the wolf that spares its rival isn't all that different from a soldier who honors a white flag. This core principle that you do not attack an enemy who has surrendered is a fundamental rule that allows for social order. It prevents total self-destructive war. And when any group, animal or human, starts breaking that rule, they're not just being cruel. They're undermining the very fabric of trust that prevents a total collapse. So, after all this, what's the single most important lesson we can take away from King Solomon's ring? It's this. Things like mercy, restraint, and empathy, the stuff we sometimes dismiss as soft or weak, are anything but. They are highly evolved, incredibly sophisticated survival skills. They are the invisible rules of the game that allow powerful creatures, including us, to live together without just wiping each other out.
And that brings us to one last thought to leave you with. Konrad Lorenz spent his entire life patiently observing and trying to understand creatures that were completely alien to him. So, if it's possible for us to develop the patience and empathy to understand a goose or a fish or a wolf, then what's really stopping us from trying to extend that same grace to the other human beings we find so difficult to understand?